The setting sun bathed the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting a gentle glow over our tranquil neighborhood. In the kitchen, the comforting aroma of stew simmering on the stove filled the air, accompanied by the quiet hum of the radio. My son Eric had just returned home from college for the weekend. The house felt alive again, filled with the familiar peace that comes from being together. It seemed like only yesterday he was a curious little boy, following me around and asking endless questions. Now, at 21, he was a confident young man, strong, self-assured, but at times unknowingly distant. As he matured, the dynamics between us had shifted, and I was still adjusting to the change. Dinner was ready, and I called him in from the living room. As we sat at the table, I couldn't help but notice how his gaze lingered on me in a way that felt different, more intense than usual. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination. We chatted about his classes, his friends, and how much he missed being home. But there was something in the way he spoke, the way his eyes held mine, that stirred inexplicable feeling inside me. It was something I couldn't quite define, but it stayed with me. After dinner, we decided to watch a movie together, something we used to do often before he left for college. The living room felt unusually cozy, the dim lighting and soft cushions creating an inviting atmosphere for a quiet evening. I couldn't recall the last time we had spent such a calm, pleasant night together. As the movie played, I found myself glancing at him more often than I should have, noticing how much he had grown into himself. He wasn't the child I had raised, he was a man now. Just as I began to feel uneasy about the thoughts creeping into my mind, he moved closer to me on the couch. At first I thought nothing of it, but then his hand brushed against mine. A jolt ran through me, an electric sensation I knew I shouldn't feel. Startled, I pulled my hand away quickly, my heart racing. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft and concerned. I avoided his gaze, trying to steady myself. "Nothing, sweetie. Just tired," I replied, hoping my voice sounded casual as I reached for my coffee mug with trembling hands. But something had shifted in that moment, a subtle yet undeniable change. A boundary that had always been there suddenly felt more tangible, more fragile. The line between mother and son felt blurred, complicated by his warmth, the shared laughter during the movie, and the brief touch that had left me shaken. The silence between us grew heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts and emotions, while the movie's soundtrack hummed softly in the background. Neither of us seemed to be paying attention to it anymore. I stood up, telling him I needed to head to bed early, but as I walked away, the sensation lingered, a persistent echo in the stillness of the house. Something fundamental had changed, and I couldn't ignore it. That night, I tossed and turned, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. I knew I couldn't allow these feelings to grow. Not for him, and not for me. I resolved to maintain my distance, to protect the integrity of our relationship, but a small, unwelcome voice whispered doubt in the back of my mind. The next morning, I woke up feeling unsettled, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on my chest. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking it, that it was all in my head. He was my son, my precious child, and I loved him deeply, but not in a way that could ever be misunderstood. When I went downstairs, Eric was already at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He greeted me with a cheerful smile, as if nothing had happened. Maybe, I thought, it really was nothing, just an odd moment I had misinterpreted. I decided to push it out of my mind, at least for now, though a quiet unease remained, whispering that something had changed. "Good morning," I said, forcing a smile and trying to sound normal. "Morning, Mom," he replied casually. "I was thinking about going for a hike later. Want to come with me?" It had been years since we'd done something like that together. I hesitated, unsure if spending more time alone with him was a good idea after how I had felt the night before, but then I reminded myself, it was just a hike. A simple outing between a mother and her son. "Sure," I said after a pause. That sounds nice. That afternoon, we drove to a nearby trail we had visited many times when he was younger. The crisp air and clear blue sky made the day feel almost perfect, and for a little while, everything felt normal. We walked side by side, reminiscing about old memories and chatting about his plans for the future. The light-hearted conversation eased my tension, and I even found myself laughing, thinking I might have overreacted to the previous night. But as we continued along the trail, moments of silence crept into our conversation. These pauses felt heavier than they should, laden with an unspoken tension I couldn't fully understand or ignore. As we reached a clearing overlooking the valley, Eric stopped, taking in the breathtaking view. Then he turned to me, his voice unusually soft and serious. "You've always been there for me, Mom," he said. "I don't know what I'd do without you. Something in his tone caught me off guard, a tenderness that made my heart ache. Smiling, I tried to ease the moment. "You don't need to worry about that anytime soon," I joked lightly. "I'm not going anywhere." But he didn't laugh. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "No, I mean it," he continued. "You've always been more than just my mom. You've been everything." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I wasn't ready to confront. Searching his face, I hoped to see simple affection, a moment of sentimentality. Yet there was something in his gaze, something that made my pulse quicken, just as it had the night before. "Eric, you know how much I love you, right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," he replied, moving even closer. "I love you too, more than you realize." My heart raced, a mix of confusion and panic rising within me. This wasn't how a mother and son were meant to speak or look at each other. Every instinct told me to step back, to create distance. But I felt rooted to the spot. "I think we should head back," I said shakily, glancing at the fading sunlight. "It's getting late." Before I could move, his hand reached out to mine. The touch was light, almost innocent, but the way his thumb softly brushed my skin made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't ignore. "Mom," he said gently, his voice carrying an emotion I couldn't quite name. I don't know how to say this, but I've been feeling something. Something I know I shouldn't. And I think you felt it too." A surge of panic washed over me. Pulling my hand away, I took a step back, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Eric, stop," I said, my voice trembling. "You don't mean that. You're confused." His expression shifted to a mixture of confusion and pain. "I'm not confused, Mom," he insisted. "I know how I feel." Shaking my head, I struggled to find words. "This isn't right. You're my son. We can't—" The sentence caught in my throat, too heavy to finish. Eric's face clouded with emotion, and he took a deep breath. "Mom," he began, his voice barely audible, "I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either." Tears blurred my vision as I fought to hold myself together. This couldn't be happening. I had to stop it before we crossed a line we could never uncross. "I'm your mother," I said, my voice breaking. "I love you, but not like that. We can't." The words hung in the air, suffocating in their weight. His shoulders slumped, and he nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. "I didn't mean to. I never wanted to make you uncomfortable." Swallowing hard, I tried to push down the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "It's okay," I managed softly, though I wasn't sure if that was true. "Let's just go home." The drive back was suffocatingly silent. Eric didn't say a word, and neither did I. The weight of what had transpired on the trail pressed down on us, making every passing moment feel unbearably long. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, my mind racing as I tried to process his confession. It felt as though the foundation of our relationship had been turned upside down. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Eric mumbled something about going to his room and disappeared upstairs. I didn't stop him. Instead, I collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling as the emotions I had been holding back threatened to overwhelm me. He was my son, my baby boy, but he wasn't a child anymore. The realization that our relationship had taken on an unthinkable complexity was terrifying. I wanted to believe this was just a phase, something fleeting that time would erase. But the way he had looked at me, the way his hand had lingered, suggested otherwise. Guilt gnawed at me. Had I done something wrong? Had I been too affectionate, too close over the years? Yet, wasn't it a mother's job to love and nurture her child? That was all I had ever tried to do. Now, though, everything felt tainted by the strange tension that had grown between us, and I didn't know how to fix it. The rest of the day passed in a blur as I tried to avoid him, busying myself with chores to distract from the confusion and unease. By evening, I was emotionally drained, dreading the inevitable confrontation. We couldn't go on like this, pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. That night, as I lay tossing and turning, a knock at the door startled me. My heart sank. I knew it was him. "Mom, can I come in?" Eric's voice was soft, hesitant. My instincts screamed at me to refuse, to create some distance, but I couldn't avoid this forever. Taking a deep breath, I replied, "Come in." Sitting up in bed, I pulled the covers around me, as if they could shield me from what was coming. He entered, his expression as conflicted as I felt, and lingered near the door before sitting cautiously at the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I shouldn't have said what I said earlier. I don't know what came over me." I nodded slowly, searching for the right response. "I know this is confusing," I said carefully. "But what happened earlier?" I paused, my voice firm but kind. "It can't happen again." "Eric, we have to be cautious," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. "This isn't how things are meant to be." "I'm your mother," I reminded him, my tone soft but resolute. "That's all I can ever be. You understand that, don't you?" He looked at me, his eyes brimming with hurt, and nodded slowly. "I know," he replied, his voice trembling. I don't want to lose you." "Maybe it's best if you return to school tomorrow," I suggested carefully. "I think some space will help us both clear our heads." Eric nodded slowly, though the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe you're right." The following morning, I watched as he packed his belongings. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, and I wrestled with the urge to hug him, to reassure him that everything would be fine. But after what had happened, I couldn't bring myself to do it. When he finally left, the house felt emptier than it had in years. I sat on the couch, staring out the window, lost in thought. I knew we'd made the right decision to create distance. Yet that didn't make it any less painful. A mother and son's relationship is supposed to be straightforward, untainted, and pure, but ours had become something far more complex, something neither of us was equipped to handle. In the days that followed, I tried to return to my normal routine, but everything felt different. The house was unnervingly quiet without Eric, and my thoughts drifted to him far more often than they should have. I told myself the separation would help, that it would give us the time and space needed to sort through our feelings. But deep down, I couldn't shake the realization that things would never return to how they used to be. Something fundamental had shifted between us, something irreversible, and as I sat alone in the silence, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held for us now. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen to my story. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.